I am 34 years old. I got divorced young and I have no kids. For the last 9 years, I drive long-haul freight, mostly produce and dry goods between the Midwest and the East Coast. I am home now after a 4-week stretch on the road. It feels good to sleep in a real bed for full nights. I eat simple food at the kitchen table. I watch late-night TV with the sound low, because the silence of the house sometimes bothers me more than the noise from the television. I live in the farmhouse I inherited from my Uncle Roy 2 years ago. Roy never married and kept to himself. He left the house and about 4 acres of unused land to me because I am the only relative who visited him regularly. The house sits a half-mile off the main road down a gravel driveway. Old fence posts line the driveway, but they do not hold any fence anymore. The nearest neighbors are the Pruits, a retired couple who live almost a mile away. On a clear night, I can see their porch light, but the distance is far enough that sounds do not carry between the homes. I have been home 4 days after that long run. I plan to call my dispatcher early tomorrow because I have a delivery scheduled in 2 days. I am the kind of man who double-checks the stove to make sure it is off and leaves the porch light on. These are habits from years of truck stops and unfamiliar motels. I do them because they keep things in order. The house has its details. The third stair creaks every time I step on it. In the kitchen, Roy's old corded phone still hangs on the wall. I have not replaced it. The long hallway has a single bulb that hums a little when it is on. The back door does not lock as well as the front one. The latch is loose. I mean to fix it one of these days, but I have not done it yet. The isolation here is normal for me. I am used to it and I like it most of the time. Tonight I finish rinsing my plate after dinner and set it in the sink. I check the stove twice, then I walk through the hallway. The third stair creaks under my boot. The bulb overhead hums faintly. I check the back door out of habit, even though the lock is not perfect. I make sure the front door is secure and leave the porch light on. After that, I sit down in the recliner in the living room and turn on the TV with the volume low. The knock came at 11:42 according to my phone. 3 taps, evenly spaced. They sounded deliberate. I froze in the hallway. A knock at this hour out here was not normal. I stood still for a moment and thought about it. I considered ignoring it and going back to the recliner. Then I remembered the story Roy told me once. A man broke down on Route 9 15 years ago. Roy helped him, nothing bad happened. It was just a guy with a flat tire. I used that memory to talk myself into checking the door, that maybe someone needs help. I moved to the side window and looked out before I unlocked anything. A man stood on the porch. He was mid-50s. He wore a jacket that looked too thin for the cold. His hair was disheveled. He did not look at the door. Instead, he glanced repeatedly back down the driveway toward the road. I noted how still he stood. He did not pace. He did not shiver even though the air was cold. That detail did not seem strange to me right then. I opened the door on the chain. "Can I help you?" I said. The man gave his story. His truck broke down 2 miles back on Route 9 past the old quarry turn. His phone was dead. He had not seen a lit house in a long time. I studied him through the gap in the door. His shoes were muddy. His hands looked reddened from the cold. He had a slight limp on the left leg. I did not smell any alcohol. He looked more frightened than threatening. I told myself that frightened men can still be dangerous, but I chose the simpler explanation for now. He needed help. I offered to bring the phone outside to him. It was a half measure. I did not want to let a stranger in right away. The man hesitated. He looked tired. The cold was clear on him. I thought about it for a moment. Then I undid the chain and invited him inside. He paused at the threshold. He glanced backward once more at the dark beyond the porch light. Once he stepped in, he checked that the door was properly shut behind him. He made sure it closed all the way. I noticed the action but did not think much about it at the time. I led him to the kitchen. The corded phone hung on the wall. I pointed to it. "You can use this," I said. I started the coffee maker. It gave me something to do with my hands. The man dialed a number. He let it ring. No one answered. He said it was his brother he tried to reach. We sat at the kitchen table while the coffee brewed. The bulb in the hallway still hummed faintly from earlier. The third stair had creaked when I came down. Now the house felt a little different with another person in it. I asked him a few questions about what happened. He repeated that the truck broke down. He walked 2 miles looking for help. I listened and watched him. His jacket was thin. His hands were still reddened. The limp showed a little when he shifted in the chair. I thought about the time. It was late. Most people were not out driving this far from town at this hour. I kept my thoughts to myself for now. The coffee finished. I poured 2 cups. I set one in front of him. He thanked me. His voice was rough but steady. I sat across from him. The kitchen table was the same one Roy used for years. I drank my coffee and listened as he talked more about the truck. The story was simple. Truck trouble. Dead phone. Long walk. He saw my porch light. I thought again about Roy's story. A man needed help. Roy gave it. Nothing bad came from it. I used that thought to stay calm. I offered him the phone again if he wanted to try the number once more. He shook his head. He said he would wait a bit. Maybe his brother would call back. I checked the time on my phone. It was still late. The gravel driveway was quiet outside. No other cars had come. The back door was closed. The front door was shut. I sat with the man in the kitchen and drank my coffee. The house made its usual small sounds. The refrigerator ran for a moment, then stopped. The old bulb in the hallway continued its faint hum if I listened for it. The man sat with his hands around the coffee cup. He looked exhausted. I decided to let him warm up for a while. I did not ask too many questions yet. I told myself this was probably nothing, just a guy with bad luck on a cold night. I kept the simpler read in my mind. I offered him more coffee when his cup was low. He accepted. We sat at the table. The corded phone hung on the wall behind him. I thought about the loose latch on the back door but did not mention it. The porch light was still on outside. Everything was as it should be for now. The man shifted in his chair. The limp showed again. His muddy shoes were under the table. I noted the details without saying anything. A knock at this hour was unusual, but I handled it the way I handled most things on the road. One step at a time. Check the facts. Offer basic help. I sat with him in the kitchen and waited to see what happened next. I thought about my routine. I had checked the stove earlier. I had walked the hallway. The third stair creaked the same as always. Now I sat with this stranger and drank coffee. The house felt steady around us. I kept things simple. I asked him how long he had been walking. He gave a short answer. I nodded and refilled the cups. The kitchen was quiet except for the small sounds we made. The clock on the wall ticked. The coffee maker cooled down with a few clicks. I sat back in my chair and watched him. He was not shaking. He held the cup steadily. I noted his exhaustion but did not push for more details. He was inside now. He was out of the cold. That was enough for the moment. I remembered other nights on the road when I needed help. Flat tires, dead batteries, strange places. People helped sometimes. I tried to do the same here. I kept the conversation light. Daniel started talking. He explained unprompted why he was on that stretch of road so late. He told me about a falling out with his brother that happened years earlier. Their father died and left the family farm, and a modest savings account split unevenly between the two of them. The brother got more because he had stayed local and helped care for their father in his final years. Daniel had been away working out of state and only came back for the funeral. Daniel described how the resentment festered for years. Phone calls stopped. His brother got married and Daniel was not invited. Holidays passed with the two of them apart. He framed himself as the wronged one. He said he had been shut out for no good reason, but as he talked I noticed an undercurrent of guilt in how he told it. He paused before some key details. His eyes drifted to the side. He looked away from me when he mentioned certain parts. The coffee finished. I poured us both another cup. Daniel kept talking. He explained that tonight he had finally decided to drive out and confront his brother face to face. He wanted to settle it once and for all, but his truck broke down on the way. That was why he ended up at my door. I listened carefully. I started doing quiet math in my head. He gave a timeline for when he left his apartment. He said how long the drive should have taken. He also said how long he had been walking. The numbers did not add up cleanly. There was a gap I could not quite make sense of. I did not call him out on it. I just registered the discrepancy as an itch in the back of my mind. I kept listening. Daniel spoke in a steady voice, but there were moments where he slowed down. He repeated that his brother had received more from their father's will because he had done the caregiving. Daniel said he understood why on paper, but it still felt unfair after all the years. He talked about the phone calls that became less frequent and then stopped, the wedding invitation that never came, the holidays he spent alone while his brother stayed close to home. I refilled his cup when it got low. I drank mine slowly. The kitchen was quiet except for his voice and the small sounds of the house. The refrigerator clicked on and off. The old corded phone hung on the wall behind him. The hallway bulb still hummed if I listened for it. I sat across from him and watched his face. He looked tired. The slight limp showed when he shifted his weight in the chair. His muddy shoes had left a little dirt on the floor, but I did not say anything about it. He told me more about the drive that night. He said he left his apartment with the plan to talk things out. He wanted to clear the air. The truck breaking down was bad luck. He walked the rest of the way until he saw my porch light. That was the story he gave. I kept my questions simple. I asked how far he thought the walk had been. He gave an answer. I compared it in my head to the timeline he mentioned earlier. The numbers still did not line up perfectly. I noted it but let it pass. I did not want to make him uncomfortable. He was already inside my house. I figured it was better to let him talk. Daniel paused at times. He looked down at his coffee cup. His eyes drifted to the side again when he talked about the unfair split of the savings. He said he had been away working, trying to make his own way, while his brother stayed home. He repeated that he was the one left out, but the pauses and the way he avoided my eyes for a second or two made me wonder. There seemed to be guilt mixed in with the resentment. I thought about my own life as I listened. I had no brothers or sisters. Uncle Roy left everything to me because I was the only one who visited. Family matters could get complicated. I understood that much. I did not say any of this out loud. I just sat there and let Daniel continue. He circled back to tonight. He said he had been thinking about the falling out for a long time. He finally decided enough was enough. He got in his truck to drive out and settle it. Then the breakdown happened. He walked in the cold. He saw my light. That brought him here. The coffee pot sat empty now. I did not make more. I let him finish what he was saying. The kitchen table felt solid between us. The house was the same as always. The third stair waited at the end of the hallway. The back door with its loose latch stayed closed. Everything was ordinary except for the man sitting across from me telling his story. I registered the timeline discrepancy again. It was like a small itch. I did not scratch at it yet. I simply kept listening. Daniel seemed to need to talk. I let him. I drank the last of my coffee and waited to see what else he would say. He had come a long way, he said. He just wanted to make things right with his brother. That was why he was out so late. That was how he ended up at my door. Daniel asked to use the bathroom. I pointed him down the hallway and told him where it was. While he was gone, I had a few minutes of privacy. I used the time to look out the kitchen window toward the driveway. The porch light reached part of the gravel. I noticed fresh tire tracks near the start of my drive. They were clear in the dirt and gravel. Those tracks did not belong to a vehicle parked 2 miles away on Route 9. This was the first hard piece of evidence that Daniel's story did not fully hold together. I did not confront him when he came back. I decided instead to test the story gently. When Daniel returned to the kitchen, I made the offer. I told him I could drive him back to his truck myself. It was no trouble, I said. Daniel reacted with visible discomfort. He was overly grateful in a way that did not quite fit. He thanked me several times, but insisted he did not want to put me out any further. He said he would just wait for his brother to maybe call back. Or he could wait until morning and flag someone down on the main road. His words came quickly. He shifted in his chair as he spoke. I noticed the deflection. I let it go for now. I chose instead to keep him talking. I reasoned to myself that the more Daniel said, the more I could figure out what was actually going on. I refilled his coffee cup. I did it partly for hospitality and partly to buy time to think. I did not want to be paranoid about a man who might genuinely just be cold, lost, and embarrassed. He had come to my door late at night. He looked tired. He had a limp. His jacket was too thin. I told myself these things. At the same time, small wrong details were accumulating. The fresh tire tracks outside. The way he deflected my offer to drive him back. The too precise location he gave earlier despite supposedly walking 2 miles in the dark without a phone or flashlight. Those details sat in the back of my mind. I poured more coffee for both of us. The pot was getting low, but I made another small batch. Daniel thanked me again. He held the cup with both hands. I sat across from him and asked simple questions. I asked how long he thought the walk had taken. He gave an answer. I compared it quietly to what he said before. The numbers still did not line up well. I did not point it out. I just listened. I thought about my own habits. I double-checked things. I liked routines. This situation was outside my normal routine. A stranger in my kitchen after midnight. A story with small holes. I did not want to jump to conclusions. Maybe the tire tracks were from earlier in the day and I had not noticed them. Maybe Daniel was simply embarrassed about needing help. I kept those thoughts in balance with the details I had seen. Daniel talked a little more about his brother. I let him. I refilled the cups again. The kitchen felt warm from the coffee maker. The hallway bulb hummed in the background. The third stair stayed silent for now. I watched Daniel's face. He looked uncomfortable when I mentioned driving him back. He repeated that he did not want to trouble me. He said he could wait. Morning was not far off. I nodded. I kept my voice even. I asked him if he wanted something to eat. He said no. I did not push. I sat there and let the conversation continue. The more he spoke, the more I listened for inconsistencies. The timeline bothered me. The walk in the dark without a light bothered me. The tire tracks were the clearest problem. I had seen them with my own eyes. Still, I did not want to be the kind of person who turned away someone in real need. I had been helped on the road before. I remembered cold nights and broken-down trucks. I tried to hold both ideas at the same time. He might be telling the truth. He might not. I kept refilling the coffee to give myself time. Daniel shifted again in his chair. The limp showed when he moved. His muddy shoes had dried a little. I thought about the back door with its loose latch. I thought about the front door I had let him through. I stayed calm. I asked him another neutral question about the drive. He answered. The answer added another small piece that did not fit perfectly with the rest. I refilled the cups once more. The coffee was mostly for buying time now. I did not drink mine as fast. I watched and listened. Daniel seemed nervous when I offered help again. He thanked me but turned it down. He said his brother might call, or morning would be fine. I nodded and let it pass. The house was quiet around us. No cars on the road. No sounds from the Pruitt's place a mile away. Just the two of us in the kitchen. I kept my interior balance. I did not want to be paranoid, but the details kept adding up. The tire tracks, the deflected offer, the timeline. I noted them all without saying anything yet. I poured the last of the coffee. I would make more if needed. For now I sat with Daniel and let him talk. I waited and thought. The night continued. The small wrong details stayed with me. Daniel kept talking. It seemed like he could not stop now that he had started. He admitted the falling out with his brother was not just emotional distance. There was a specific incident a few years back. It happened after a drunken argument at their father's wake. Daniel pushed his brother. His brother hit his head on a doorframe and needed stitches. It was nothing life-threatening, but it was enough to end their relationship outright. Daniel framed the incident as ancient history. He called it water under the bridge, but I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he talked about it. The shaking was more than the cold alone would explain. I watched him without saying anything. I kept my face steady. We were still sitting at the kitchen table. The coffee cups were in front of us. I had refilled them several times already. Daniel's voice stayed mostly even, but the pauses grew longer when he spoke about the fight. He said it was in the past. He said he had moved on. His hands told a different story. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it without picking it up right away. It was not Daniel's call going through. It was an unrelated notification. I had a local community alert app on my phone from last year when there were some break-ins in the area. The alert mentioned a disturbance reported earlier that evening on Route 9 near the old quarry turn. It was the exact location Daniel claimed his truck broke down. I read the message without letting Daniel see the screen. I felt my stomach drop. The notification was vague. It said police were responding to a report of a disturbance, but the location match was too exact to be a coincidence. I set the phone back down casually and turned my attention back to Daniel. This became the turning point for me. I went from being a cautious host to feeling quietly alarmed. I started thinking about how to get Daniel out of the house or how to get help without tipping him off that something had changed. I needed to be careful. I made an excuse a few minutes later. I told Daniel I should check the breaker in the other room. I said the lights had flickered earlier. It was not true, but it gave me a reason to leave the kitchen. I walked down the hallway. The third stair creaked under my foot. I stood in the next room for a moment and thought. I considered calling the police right then, but I did not want to risk Daniel hearing me. I went back to the kitchen after a short time. Daniel was still sitting at the table. He thanked me again for the coffee. I refilled his cup even though he had not finished the last one. I wanted to keep things normal. I offered to grab more firewood from the back even though I did not need it. I said the house sometimes got drafty at night. He said it was not necessary. I sat back down. My mind worked while I listened to him. I needed a plan. I could not just tell him to leave. I did not know what he might do. I thought about stepping away again to make a quiet call from another part of the house. I waited for the right moment. Daniel continued talking about his brother. He repeated that the fight at the wake was old news. His hands shook a little more when he said it. I watched the clock on the wall. The night had gone on longer than I expected. The tire tracks were still in my mind. The timeline did not add up. Now this alert about a disturbance at the exact spot he mentioned. The pieces were not fitting. I stayed calm on the outside. I nodded when he spoke. I asked a simple question now and then to keep him talking. I made another excuse later. I told him I needed to check on something in the hallway closet. I left the kitchen again. Once I was out of sight, I thought about my options. I could try to call for help from the other room. I could try to get him out of the house politely. I weighed the choices. I did not want to make the situation worse. I went back to the table after a minute. Daniel was still there. He looked tired, but he kept talking. He said he hoped his brother would understand. He said he just wanted to settle things. His hands were not steady. I poured more coffee. It gave me something to do. It also gave me more time to think. I felt the shift inside myself. I was no longer simply being a helpful person. I was quietly alarmed. I needed to figure out the safest way forward. I considered offering to drive him somewhere again, but I remembered how he reacted last time. He turned it down quickly. I decided to keep listening for now and look for a safe moment to step away and make a call. The house felt the same as always. The bulb hummed in the hallway. The back door stayed closed. The front door was shut. But everything had changed a little since that phone alert. I sat with Daniel and kept the conversation going. I watched his hands. I listened to his words. I waited for the right time to act. I refilled the cups one more time. The coffee was mostly a way to buy time. Daniel thanked me again. I nodded. Inside, I was working through what to do next. The small details had added up. The story had cracks. I needed to handle this carefully. Daniel noticed the shift in my behavior. He saw how stiff I was sitting. He saw the way my eyes kept moving to the door and then to the window. He called it out directly. "You think something's wrong with me," he said. The words sat there in the kitchen. It was past midnight. We were just two men at the table with coffee cups between us. The hallway bulb was humming like it always does. The house was quiet. He didn't get loud or pushy about it. He just sat back a little in his chair and waited. After a minute, he started talking again, his voice even and low. "There was no broken down truck," he said. He told me he had driven to his brother's place that night. He went there to talk things out. They had been having problems for a long time, and he thought maybe they could settle some of it. But the talk turned into another argument. It got physical. His brother fell down the porch steps and hit his head. He didn't get up right away. Daniel said he panicked. He didn't check to see if his brother was okay. He didn't call for help. He got back in his truck and left. He drove for a while without really thinking about where he was going. Later, he pulled off near the quarry and left the truck there. Then he walked the rest of the way. He saw my porch light and came to the door. I sat and took in what he was saying. It sounded like the kind of thing that happens when someone gets scared and doesn't know what to do. He wasn't trying to make it sound better than it was. He just laid it out. He said he knew it was wrong to leave his brother there. He wished he had stayed and helped, but he didn't. He ran instead. The kitchen stayed the same as it had been all night. The table, the chairs, the cups. Nothing had changed in the room, but everything felt different now that I had the full story. I thought back to the tire tracks in the driveway and the alert on my phone earlier. It fit with what he was telling me. Daniel looked down at his hands. They were still a little unsteady. He didn't say much more at first. He just sat there. After a while, he added that he had been carrying it around all night, not sure if his brother was all right or not. That part seemed to bother him the most. I didn't say anything right away. I got up and refilled the coffee cups again. The pot was getting low, but there was enough for one more round. I poured it slowly and sat back down. It gave me time to think. I had let a stranger into my house earlier that night. Now I knew what had actually happened. I needed to decide what to do next. He wasn't acting dangerous. He just looked tired and sorry about how things had gone. We sat there for a bit longer. The clock on the wall kept ticking. I could hear the fridge running in the background. Outside it was dark and still. I thought about the situation I was in. I live alone out here, and it was late. Most people were asleep by now. Daniel had come to my door looking for help, and I had given it. But helping meant something different now that I knew the rest of the story. He had left his brother after the fall. That was a serious thing. He spoke up again after some time. His words were plain. He said he knew he should have stayed at his brother's place. Fear got the better of him, and he made a bad choice. There was no big explanation or story to go with it, just that he regretted it and didn't know what would happen next. I listened and nodded once or twice so he knew I was following. I didn't judge him out loud. I didn't try to make him feel better either. We just sat with the information. 2 men at the table past midnight. The coffee was cooling off again in the cups. The hallway light kept humming. I thought about what I had seen earlier. The way he showed up at the door, how he had cleaned up in the bathroom, the truck he mentioned that wasn't really broken down. It all matched what he was saying now. He wasn't adding extra details or changing anything. It felt straightforward. The house made its usual small sounds, a board settling here and there, the wind brushing against the side of the place once in a while. Nothing loud, nothing out of the ordinary. Inside, I was going over what my options were. I could call someone. I could tell him he needed to leave. I could wait until morning and see how things looked then. None of it felt simple. Daniel didn't pressure me for an answer. He sat slumped a bit in the chair, looking at the table mostly. He seemed smaller now that he had told the full story. He had been holding on to it for hours, walking in the dark, and now it was out. I could see that some of the tension had gone out of him, even if the worry was still there. I asked him a couple of basic questions after a while. How long ago did the fall happen? Did he see anyone else around his brother's place? He answered straight. The timing fit with when I had first heard the knock. No one else had been around as far as he knew. We went quiet again. I drank some of the coffee. It was lukewarm now. Daniel did the same. The night kept moving forward, slow and steady. I thought about my day earlier, how normal it had been until the knock at the door. I had been reading in the living room, nothing special. Then everything changed. He mentioned his brother a few more times. They had a history of arguments like this, but nothing that had gone this far before. He said he hoped his brother had gotten up or that someone had found him by now. He didn't know for sure, and that seemed to sit with him. I didn't offer advice. I just listened. The situation was what it was. A man had come to my house after making a mistake out of fear. Now I had the truth, and I had to figure out the next step. I stayed calm. There was no reason to raise my voice or make things bigger than they needed to be. The kitchen table felt solid under my arms. The chairs were the same ones I sat in every day. The back door with the loose latch was still shut. Everything in the house was ordinary. It was just the conversation that had taken a turn. I sat in the kitchen past midnight with a man who had just admitted to leaving his injured brother behind without help. The weight of what Daniel told me settled in the room. I had to decide what to do next. I could confront him directly. I could try to keep him calm while I alerted someone, or I could physically prevent him from leaving until help arrived. None of those options felt completely right. I chose a middle path. I told Daniel calmly that we needed to call for help for his brother right now. I framed it as concern for his brother's safety rather than suspicion of him. I hoped this approach would keep him cooperative instead of defensive. I said his brother might still need medical attention. It was better to get help sooner rather than later. Daniel resisted at first. He looked terrified of what calling the police would mean for him. He shook his head. He said he could not do that. He worried about the consequences. His voice was low and worried. He sat hunched over the table. I pressed gently. I told him his brother might still be alive. He might need help immediately. I repeated that we should do the right thing and call. I was not acting as an aggressor or a hero. I was simply trying to do the decent thing while also protecting myself. I kept my voice steady. I did not raise it. I stayed at the table with him. Daniel sat there overwhelmed. He stared at his coffee cup. His hands were still not steady. He did not argue loudly. He just looked afraid. I gave him a moment. I did not push too hard right away. I let my words sink in. While he sat at the table, I stepped into the next room. I made the excuse that I needed to grab my charger or check on something. I moved calmly. Once I was out of the kitchen, I quietly dialed 911 on my cell phone. I kept my voice low. I did not want Daniel to hear the full conversation. The dispatcher answered. I gave her the details Daniel had provided. I told her about the brother's general location. I described the nature of the fall down the porch steps. I mentioned the time that had passed since it happened. I spoke clearly but quietly. I kept an eye on Daniel from the doorway. He stayed at the table. He did not move. The dispatcher asked questions. I answered them as best I could. I told her my address. I explained that the man was still here with me. I said the situation was calm for now. I asked for police and an ambulance to be sent. She said they were on the way. I ended the call and stood there for a moment. I took a breath, then I walked back into the kitchen. Daniel looked up at me. He seemed to know something had changed. I sat down across from him again. I told him I had called for help. I said it was the right thing to do. I repeated that his brother might still need it. Daniel did not get angry. He looked defeated more than anything. He asked what would happen to him. I told him I did not know. I said the important thing was making sure his brother was okay. I kept my tone even. I did not want to escalate anything. The kitchen felt smaller now. The clock on the wall ticked. The coffee had gone cold in our cups. I sat with Daniel and waited. I had done what I thought was right. I had called for help while trying to keep things calm. Now we waited for the next step. I thought about the night from the beginning, the knock at the door, the story that did not fully add up, the confession. My decision to call, it all led to this moment. I was not proud. I was not scared exactly. I was simply doing what needed to be done. Daniel sat quietly. He did not try to leave. He did not argue anymore. He seemed to accept that things were in motion now. I watched him carefully, but I did not stare. I stayed ready in case anything changed. Then I noticed headlights coming slowly up my long gravel driveway. The vehicle was one I did not recognize. It moved at a crawl. The tires crunched on the gravel. It stopped a good distance from the house. The lights stayed on for a moment before they went off. I stood in the hallway and watched through the front window. This was a real situation, not some supernatural threat. Just the possibility that someone had arrived at my home in the middle of the night. It could be the police already responding to the original disturbance call. It could be a worried family member, or it could be someone else connected to the fight at Daniel's brother's house. I did not know yet. My instinct was protective but careful. I did not want to alarm Daniel further. At the same time, I did not want to be caught off guard. I moved quietly to the front window. I kept my movements normal. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see. A figure got out of the vehicle. The person started walking slowly toward the porch. He limped slightly. The limp was noticeable even in the dim light from my porch lamp. I watched him come closer. Then it hit me with a jolt. This might be Daniel's brother himself. He was injured but alive. He must have tracked Daniel's abandoned truck or simply guessed where he might have gone. I stood at the window and observed. The man moved carefully. He held his side with one hand. He took his time on the gravel. He did not rush. I noted the limp again. It matched what Daniel had described from the fall. The man looked determined but in pain. He kept coming toward the house. I did not call out to Daniel right away. I wanted a moment to understand what was happening. The night had already been long. Now this. Headlights in the driveway after midnight. A limping figure walking up to my porch. I kept my breathing steady. I stayed by the window and watched. The man stopped for a second partway up the drive. He looked at the house. He looked at my truck parked to the side. He continued forward. The limp was clear. He favored his left leg. I thought about what Daniel had said. The fall down the porch steps, the head injury, the panic. Now the brother was here. I glanced back toward the kitchen. Daniel was still sitting at the table. He had not moved. He did not know about the headlights yet. I decided not to tell him immediately. I wanted to handle this carefully. I stayed at the window and kept watching the man approach. The gravel crunched under his shoes. The sound carried in the quiet night. The porch light lit up part of his face as he got closer. He looked bruised. He held his side. He was clearly hurting, but he kept walking. I realized this was likely Daniel's brother. He had gotten up after the fall. He had found the truck. He had come looking. I felt a mix of relief and tension. Relief that the brother was alive and moving. Tension because I now had both men at my house. I stayed calm. I did not open the door yet. I watched from the window. The man reached the bottom of the porch steps. He paused there. He looked up at the door. I thought about my options. I could open the door and speak to him first. I could go back to the kitchen and tell Daniel. I chose to wait a few more seconds. I wanted to see what the man would do. He stood at the bottom of the steps. He seemed to gather himself. Then he started up the porch. I moved away from the window. I walked back toward the kitchen doorway. I kept my voice low when I spoke to Daniel. I told him someone was here. I said a car had pulled up. I did not say who I thought it was. I wanted to keep things controlled. Daniel looked up. His face changed. He seemed to understand. He sat very still. I told him to stay at the table for now. I went back to the front door. I opened it carefully. I positioned myself in the doorway so I could see the man and keep an eye on the kitchen at the same time. The man stood on the porch. He looked at me. He identified himself as Daniel's brother. His voice was tired and strained. He was bruised. He held his side. He was in pain, but he was lucid. He said he had come to after the fall. He found Daniel's truck abandoned. He pieced together that Daniel might have come this way. I stood there and listened. The night air was cold. The porch light shone on both of us. I did not invite him inside right away. I asked him if he was okay. He said he needed to see his brother. He wanted answers. I told him the police were already on the way. I had called them. The man nodded. He looked past me into the house. I stayed in the doorway. I kept my position. I did not want any sudden movements. I told him to wait with me. Help was coming. He agreed. He stood on the porch and waited. His limp was clear. He held his side. I glanced back at Daniel in the kitchen. He had not moved. The two brothers were now close but not yet face to face. I stood between them in a way. I waited for the flashing lights I knew were coming. The headlights had brought a new development. The night was not over yet. I stayed calm. I spoke to the brother in a steady voice. I told him his brother was inside. I said he was safe. I asked the brother to stay on the porch for now. He did. We waited together in the cold night air. The gravel driveway was quiet again. The house stood behind me. I had made my calls. Now we waited for what came next. I answered the door cautiously. I positioned myself in the doorway to block the full view into the house. I wanted to assess the man on the porch before anything else happened. The man was bruised. He held his side with one hand. He was clearly in pain, but he was lucid. He looked at me and identified himself as Daniel's brother. He was furious, scared, and confused all at once. He told me he had gotten himself up after the fall. He found Daniel's truck abandoned on the roadside. He pieced together that Daniel might have sought help nearby. His voice was strained. He spoke through the pain. I stood in the doorway and listened. I did not invite him inside right away. I kept my body positioned to control the situation. The night air was cold. The porch light shone on his face. I could see the bruises and the way he favored his injured side. He was hurting, but he was determined. Daniel must have heard the voices. He emerged slowly from the kitchen. He looked stunned and guilty. He stopped a few feet behind me in the hallway. The two brothers were now close but separated by me standing in the doorway. I stayed there between them. I tried to keep both men calm until the police arrived. I knew they were already on the way from my earlier call. The tension was real, but there was no violence. A tired, angry, hurting man stood on the porch. A stunned and guilty Daniel stood inside. I was caught in between. I did not raise my voice. I did not move suddenly. I simply stayed present and ready. Daniel's brother spoke first. His words were raw. He demanded to know why Daniel ran instead of helping him. He asked how Daniel could leave him lying there on the porch steps. His voice carried pain and anger. He held his side tighter as he spoke. Daniel stammered apologies. The words sounded hollow even to himself. He said he panicked. He said he did not know what to do. He repeated that he was sorry. His voice was quiet. He looked at the floor. He could not meet his brother's eyes for long. The brother did not accept the apologies easily. He asked again why Daniel left. He said he woke up alone and hurting. He had to find his own way. He had to search for the truck in the dark. His words were direct. They were full of the confusion and fear he felt. I stayed largely silent. I was a stabilizing presence rather than an active participant. I occasionally stepped in only to keep things from escalating physically. When the brother raised his voice a little, I spoke calmly. I told them both that the police and ambulance were on the way. I said it was better to wait and let them handle it. My words were even. I did not take sides. Daniel tried to explain again. He said he was afraid. He thought he had hurt his brother badly. He did not know what else to do. The apologies came out broken. They did not sound convincing. He stood there with his shoulders slumped. The guilt was clear on his face. The brother listened, but his anger remained. He said Daniel always ran when things got hard. He said this time it could have cost him his life. He held his side and breathed through the pain. He did not step forward. He stayed on the porch. I stayed in the doorway. I spoke again when the tension rose. I reminded them that help was coming. I said it was important to stay calm until then. I suggested the brother sit on the porch bench if he needed to rest. He did not sit. He remained standing. He kept looking at Daniel. The exchange continued in short bursts. The brother asked more questions. Daniel gave short, guilty answers. I stood between them and kept the situation from boiling over. I did not add many words. I simply made sure neither man moved toward the other. The night air came through the open doorway. The gravel driveway was quiet. No other cars had arrived yet. I listened for sirens in the distance. I knew they would come soon. Until then I held my position. I kept the two brothers from getting any closer. Daniel looked smaller. His earlier confession had already taken something out of him. Now facing his brother made it worse. He stammered another apology. It sounded weak. The brother shook his head. He said sorry was not enough, not after being left alone like that. I stepped in once more. I told them both to wait. I said the paramedics would check the brother's injuries. I said the police would sort out the rest. My voice stayed steady. I was not trying to be in charge. I was just trying to keep the peace in my doorway. The two men looked at each other past me, one hurt and angry, the other guilty and ashamed. I stood there as the buffer. The tension stayed, but it did not break into anything physical. We waited. The porch light stayed on. The cold night continued around us. I glanced down the driveway once. Still no flashing lights. I stayed patient. I kept my place in the doorway. I watched both men. I waited for the help I had called for earlier. The confrontation in the doorway remained controlled, raw but contained. Two brothers and me in between on a cold night. Flashing lights appeared down the driveway. The red and blue lights cut through the dark. Police were responding to my call. An ambulance came with them. The vehicles moved slowly up the gravel drive. The lights reflected off the old fence posts. I stood in the doorway and watched them approach. The night was ending the way these things often do, with official help arriving. The officers got out first. They moved efficiently. Two of them came to the porch. They saw me in the doorway, the brother standing there in pain and Daniel inside. They separated the two brothers right away. One officer spoke to Daniel's brother on the porch. Another officer went inside and stayed with Daniel. They kept them apart. That was standard. Paramedics from the ambulance came next. They checked the brother's head injury. They examined him carefully on the porch. They asked him questions. They checked his eyes and his balance. They told him it was serious but not life-threatening. He had a concussion and would need a few stitches. It mirrored the earlier fight years ago at their father's wake. I noticed that quiet parallel even in the middle of the activity. The same kind of injury from a similar argument. Daniel was taken aside for questioning. An officer led him to one of the police cars. They sat him in the back seat with the door open. The gravity of his situation was now fully out of his hands. He looked small under the flashing lights. He answered their questions quietly. I could not hear the words from where I stood. I gave my statement to one of the officers. I explained simply what happened. I told him about the knock at the door at 11:42. I described Daniel's first story about the truck breaking down. I mentioned the small discrepancies I noticed, the timeline, the tire tracks, the location he gave. I told the officer about Daniel's full confession. I explained that I called 911 after he admitted leaving his brother behind. I kept my words clear and factual. I did not add extra details. The officer took notes. He asked a few follow-up questions. I answered them. He wrote everything down. There was no dramatic showdown. There was no last-minute twist. The situation resolved the way real events like this usually do. It was messy and administrative. There was paperwork. There were quiet handoffs between the officers and paramedics. The paramedics helped Daniel's brother onto a stretcher. They loaded him into the ambulance. They said they would take him to the hospital for stitches and observation. The brother looked back toward the police car where Daniel sat. He did not say anything more. The ambulance doors closed. The lights stayed flashing. The officers finished their work at the house. One of them spoke to me again. He thanked me for calling. He said I had done the right thing. He took down my contact information. He said they might need to follow up later. I nodded. I understood. I stood on the porch and watched them finish. Daniel remained in the police car. The officer with him closed the door. The car backed slowly down the driveway. The flashing lights moved away. The ambulance followed. Soon the only lights left were my porch light and the red tail lights disappearing down the gravel road. I stood there for a few minutes after they left. The house felt quiet again. The night air was cold. The tire tracks on the driveway were still visible under the porch light. I thought about everything that had happened. The knock, the coffee, the stories, the confession, the headlights, the arrival of help. It all ended with paperwork and vehicles leaving. I went back inside. I closed the front door, I locked it, I walked through the hallway. The third stair creaked under my foot. The bulb hummed overhead. I went to the kitchen. The coffee cups were still on the table. The pot was cold. I rinsed the cups and set them in the sink. I wiped the table, small, ordinary tasks. There were no big dramatic moments at the end, just officers doing their job, paramedics treating an injury, statements being taken, people being transported. The situation was handled. Daniel's choices were now in the hands of the police. His brother was on the way to the hospital. I had done what I could. I turned off the kitchen light. I checked the back door. The latch was still loose. I made a mental note to fix it soon. I walked upstairs. The house was empty again. It was past 2 a.m. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. I thought about the night. I did not feel like a hero. I did not feel like I had done anything special. I had simply tried to handle things carefully. The silence of the house returned. No more voices in the kitchen. No more flashing lights outside. Just the normal sounds I was used to. I lay down, but sleep did not come right away. I listened to the quiet. I thought about the thin line between a normal night and one that was not. The administrative part of the night was over. The vehicles had left. The statements were given. Now it was just me in the house again. The police, the ambulance, Daniel, and his brother were all gone. The flashing lights had disappeared down the gravel driveway. The house was quiet again. It was past 2 a.m. I sat alone at the kitchen table. It was the same table where Daniel had told his story just an hour or so earlier. The coffee cups were still there. I had rinsed them, but they sat drying on the counter. I looked at the empty chairs and replayed the night in my head. I thought about the knock at 11:42. I remembered standing in the hallway and deciding to open the door. I could have ignored it. I could have stayed in the recliner and let the night stay ordinary. But I remembered Roy's old story about the man on Route 9, and I opened the door anyway. That was one point where things could have gone differently. I thought about letting Daniel inside. I offered to bring the phone out first. Then I changed my mind because he looked cold and tired. I undid the chain. I let him step into the house. I could have kept him on the porch. I could have handed him the phone through the gap and closed the door, but I did not. I invited him in. I remembered offering to drive him back to his truck. He turned it down quickly. He said he did not want to put me out. I accepted that answer. I could have insisted. I could have pushed harder to see if the truck really existed. Instead, I let it pass and kept refilling the coffee. I kept listening. Small decisions added up. The tire tracks I saw from the window, the timeline that did not match, the alert on my phone about the disturbance at the quarry turn. The way his hands shook when he talked about the fight at the wake. I noticed all of those things. I did not act on them right away. I waited. I gave him time. I gave myself time to think. I did not feel proud. I did not feel heroic. I felt unsettled by how ordinary the danger actually was. There was no monster at my door. There was no supernatural threat, just a man who panicked and made a bad choice. He left his brother lying there and ran. And I was another man who could have easily ended up hurt or worse by trusting the wrong stranger at the wrong hour. I sat at the table and stared at the wall. The corded phone hung there, Roy's old phone. I had let Daniel use it. I had made coffee for him. I had sat across from him for hours. The house had felt different with him in it. Now it was empty again. The silence came back. It was the same silence I was used to, but it felt a little heavier tonight. I got up and walked through the hallway. The third stair creaked under my foot like it always did. The single bulb hummed overhead. I checked the back door. The latch was still loose. I had meant to fix it for months. I tested it again. It moved too easily. I made a note in my head to take care of it in the morning, or the next day, soon. I went to the front door. I checked the lock. I turned the deadbolt. It clicked into place. I never used to think twice about that lock. I left the door unlocked many nights. Tonight I turned the bolt. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the knob. Then I checked it again to make sure it was secure. I turned off the porch light. The outside went dark. I walked back to the kitchen. I wiped the table one more time even though it was already clean. I put the coffee cups away. I rinsed the pot. Small, ordinary tasks. They helped me come back to myself. I sat down at the table again. I replayed the night once more. The moment Daniel admitted there was no truck, the way he collapsed in his chair when he said it, the headlights coming up the driveway, the limping figure on the porch, the two brothers facing each other with me in the doorway. The police arriving, the statements, the quiet handoffs, the vehicles leaving. It was all so ordinary. That was what stayed with me. A man knocked on my door. I let him in. He told me a story. Parts of it were not true. He confessed. I called for help. His brother showed up. The police came. Paperwork was done. Everyone left. No big fight. No dramatic ending. Just a messy situation that got sorted out administratively. I thought about Daniel sitting in the back of the police car. I thought about his brother in the ambulance. I wondered what would happen to them. I wondered if the brother would be okay. I wondered what Daniel would say to the officers. Those were not my problems to solve anymore. I had done what I could. I stood up and turned off the kitchen light. I walked upstairs. The hallway felt longer than usual. I went into my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed. I took off my boots. I changed into the clothes I usually slept in. I lay down, but I did not turn off the lamp right away. I listened to the silence of the house. It was the same silence I had lived with for years. Tonight it felt different. I was aware now of how thin the boundary really is between an ordinary night and one that almost was. A knock at the wrong hour. A decision to open the door. A story that did not add up. Small choices, small details. They could change things. I thought about the tire tracks again. I thought about the limp. I thought about the way Daniel checked the door behind him when he first came in. I thought about the coffee I kept refilling. All of it played in my head. Eventually sleep came, but it took longer than usual. The boundary between ordinary and not felt thinner tonight. I noticed it. I accepted it. I went to sleep in my own house with the doors locked and the silence all around me.